Al Gore and I share a common experience of considerable magnitude. We each lost the race for presidency in the year 2000.
I like that. That was good.
Okay.
You didn't like the beginning of that.
I am Al Gore. I used to be the next president of the United States of America.
I was a valid candidate for the nomination of the Green Party and ran in primaries against Ralph Nader, who beat me handily, particularly in the California primary.
There's too much at stake. The whole future is at stake.
What Gore is beginning to preach now is what I was talking about back in 2000 when I ran for the Green Party nomination for president, not against Gore so much as against Ralph Nader. Lost big time. But the irony is that if I had been the Green Party candidate, Gore would have been president. I mean, this is not to blame Nader, because Nader was a powerful candidate who was speaking to a greater number of the American people than I would have spoken to with my sort of more far-out message.
We have to see the forest and the individual trees within the forest. And we have to see what is past or passing or to come.
I was in politics for a long time. I'm proud of my service. And when I went to the Congress in the middle 1970s, I helped organize the first hearings on global warming and asked my professor to come and be the lead-off witness, and I thought that would have such a big impact we'd be on the way to solving this problem, but it didn't work that way.
I don't think Gore should be proud of his record. He should be proud of what he's doing now, which is warning humanity of a terrible threat and trying to speak the truth. But when he was in power, he didn't use that insight in any kind of creative or constructive way. He played ball with the system. That's how he got into power. I mean, that's the point which we must never forget. And as environmental point man of the Clinton administration, really and truly, very little was done. They tried some feeble attempts to improve gasoline mileage, and they were shot down immediately by the oil industry, and they rolled over with nary a whimper. They prosecuted environmental crimes and pollution less than the Bush administration. Everything that they can point to in their economic or ecological record, environmental record, was one that enhanced the right, the necessity of capitalism to go anywhere as it wanted to invest, to move things around the world, to move things at greater distances. All the time preaching of the need for, corporate responsibility and good ideas and clean living and the like, but he was, in basics, was doing the work of the system.
What do you need right now?
There are good people who are in politics, in both parties, who hold this at arm's length because if they acknowledge it and recognize it, then the moral imperative to make big changes is inescapable.
And let's fix the biggest damn crisis in the history of this country.
Yes, it is a moral issue, but the moral issue has to do with the kinds of politics you choose. You certainly don't stand back from politics. Your morality directs you towards a certain kind of politics. When Gore speaks of morality, then it's also to disguise the fact that there's a certain politics going on, but you're not supposed to know about it because, after all, it's not political. I mean, it's plainly political because at every step of the way, he's intervening in intensely controversial matters. hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars at stake here, and where there's that much money at stake, there's power backing it up. There's the way the U.S. government works, the way the global system of capitalism works, and all of that. And by saying that this is not political, Gore is encouraging us to not think politically about what is in fact a very, very political issue. So he uses morality as kind of an ideological smokescreen.
Now, just a few weeks ago, before the former vice president arrived here on Capitol Hill, he was standing right there on the red carpet where a few hours later he received 2 Oscars for a documentary that he had done on the climate change issue. But the question that a lot of folks were asking him there, and that they're asking him today, Brianna, is whether or not his new celebrity and the attention that's focused on him could cause him or bring him to throw his hat in the ring again in 2008.
Well, we'll certainly be waiting for that, Andrea.
There's a moral choice involved. You don't have to be part of the system. Gore is part of the system. He wants the system to save you, to save the world, to save itself, and that's because of his loyalty to the mainstream of power and wealth in our society, and that's a moral position. We can try to put all these things into some kind of practice by imaginary exercise, which again is production. Let us say that we're organizing a class trip in a plane, and for purposes of argument, I don't take the trip. Okay? Just you and the pilot of the plane, the whole class. And the plane has to make a crash landing, in the course of which the pilot dies, and you find yourself on an island in the middle of the ocean. What are you going to do?
Start building a shelter.
You yourself?
Together, you'd probably build a better shelter that way.
Within our being all in panic mode, eventually a minority of people would take dominant roles because they'd be able to deal with a specific kind of stress that was happening easier. And then it'd be like, you know, these 3 people have it together more, and they know a little bit more about like wilderness survival, so they would inevitably take like a dominant role. And like since since I've only grown up in cities, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'll go do that. And then eventually those people would sort of like attain like leader status. I don't know if it balance out.
Each of you is bringing to it a consciousness, a sensibility that is itself the product of a million years of human evolution. See, the point of this is like a microcosm of what? Yeah, history of the world. Yeah. There is no government, which is to say, at this point, there's no such thing as a state. We haven't yet at all talked about what the state is. I mean, you immediately said, well, let's elect the president. But to elect the president, you need a state apparatus of some kind, which had a constitution for which the president makes sense. You know, the president does this, the president is chosen this way, and so on and so on. Somebody else will say, well, how are we going to choose a president anyhow? What's the president going to do? You know, so there's no notion of the state, right? Not to say there won't be, but that's the starting point. There isn't. Just as there was no state when human beings first came out of the trees and did what they did. There was no money. One of the bad jokes would be, I'm sure you start take out your wallets and what are we going to do with this dollar bills or credit cards, right? What's the point? No banks. You can use a credit card to open clams or something like that. That might be very useful. Which is to say, you also need to develop tools. Because we are always in a state of lack and insufficiency and wanting to transform nature, it almost immediately occurs to developing human beings that we can use various means of doing so, which means constitute, in the larger sense, the word technology. So you immediately are set about with both the question of organizing yourself and the question of just transforming nature by what means, through what technologies. And then the next larger question, which is really the same question, just looked at a different angle, is how, I think it was Noah said this, you take, some people will do this and some people will do that according to their abilities. As a division of labor. So there's not just labor, but there is a social division of labor, which is a very important category. So all those things will happen. And then is also the question of the naturally occurring division, which has to do with the fact that there are two basic body plans among you. Both humans, both have many things in common, but obviously significant difference between the female and the male in this respect. And these have to be understood also. So, it's very interesting, human history. How do you understand it? Well, we'll work more on that next time. And hopefully you have your papers too.
I've always felt like that there was something, wrong with the big discrepancy in that, some people are making millions and millions of dollars a year, and some people are working in sweatshops in other countries, and I've always felt that there was something wrong with that, and I was trying to formulate an explanation for it or try to explain why it's wrong, even because it's happening. I felt like it wasn't right, but I would argue with my friend who was very much for capitalism, and I would always be unable to fully express my ideas, so that's one of the reasons that I took this class.
And still in many parts of the world today, I think that children in some sense are workers because they're part of a family structure, or they're taking care of siblings or doing labor,
right.
But it's non,
in pre-capitalist,
like you said, it's non-alienating because it's contributing to their own
no question
survival, and it's also not this period of 20 years where they're children and then they're suddenly dropped off in the market.
Labor markets, exactly. Very well put. Yes.
Look around you, the forests are being cut down, the polar ice
and
caps are melting as we speak, education is being privatized everywhere, workers make nothing, and all of these social phenomena we're supposed to just accept. Basically all of these things that we're being confronted as 21-year-olds, there's this tendency in our society that, we're just supposed to accept the electoral process and accept a free market and then just do the best we can. And this class is interesting because there are alternatives. There are people through history who have been talking about them, and it's really important that we continue to talk about them and continue to theorize.
I was born in 1936 in New York City, fairly traditional Jewish American home, good student, went to Ivy League schools, very interested in science as a youngster, and turned to medicine, became a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, however, deeply politically tuned, kind of a natural-born radical, I would say, and eventually those sides of myself clashed, and I ceased being a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and became a regular professor, and I've been writing and teaching and agitating ever since in a lifelong quest to make the world a better place.
Nancy was almost 10 years older than me, and there were only the two of us. She was my protector and my friend at the same time. She started smoking when she was a teenager and never stopped. She died of lung cancer. The idea that we had been part of that economic pattern that produced the cigarettes, that produced the cancer, it was so painful on so many levels.
Undoubtedly, Gore is deeply affected by the death of his sister, and I can see that and feel for him as a common human being. But the issue is connecting the dots, not just for that individual loss, but for the whole way in which the planetary ecology is under threat by the system of production of which Al Gore, unfortunately, is an exponent and a deep participant in. If cancer is a cellular process that grows chaotically, spreads, metastasizes, and the like, this is both a metaphor for capitalism, chaotic production, uncontrollable production, unregulated production, but also it's more than a metaphor, it's an actual description of it.
Smoke 'em, then you see. LS, MFT.
You know, it's not an analog, it's a homologue. It's actually the way in which cancer is. Capital is a cancer. The accumulation of capital is a cancer. The great reserves of wealth are products of that, secretions, if you like, of that cancer. This is a daunting perspective, but I submit that it's the truth, however inconvenient.
It's just human nature to take time to connect the dots. I know that. But I also know that there can be a day of reckoning when you wish you had connected the dots more quickly.
The question before Gore is, can you connect the dots in a way that makes sense not just for your family or individual life, but for our whole civilization? It's the way in which human nature has been socialized, the kind of social system it joins in, is shaped by, shapes in turn, and the like. So it's not just human nature in the abstract, it's a question of what are your interests, how are you indoctrinated to see the world, how can that vision of the world be changed, what can you actually do to make that change happen. By simply invoking human nature, Gore is basically, again, turning away from the political reality. It's a little like, you know, the morality idea. Now it's the human nature idea. There are larger factors at play here that prevent us from really coming to grips with things. But we have to come to grips with things, and it's not human nature that's stopping us.
We have here a scales that balances two different things. On one side, we have gold bars. Don't they look good? I'd just like to have some of those gold bars. On the other side of the scales, the entire planet. I think this is a false choice for two reasons. Number one, if we don't have a planet, the other reason is that if we do the right thing, then we're going to create a lot of wealth and we're going to create a lot of jobs, because doing the right thing moves us forward.
He airily promises that there'll be jobs or wealth for everybody, but that's, I think, hypocritical of him, because he knows full well that the jobs and the wealth are not economically determined through democratic means, you know? They're determined by the top-down power structures that run our society. And these power structures create human labor in such a way that the vast majority of people lead very stunted lives, lives that are lived for them really by other people's choices. And I think that this is probably the most essential point to bear in mind in the ecological crisis. In other words, I'm not focusing on the environment as such or the technology as such, but I'm focusing on the way people live and the way people work and the way people make their world. Because when we talk about working, we're talking about a human quality which is specifically human, namely to produce our life, to produce ourselves. You know, we're the animal that produces. We don't have fixed instincts, but rather we have culture and the capacity to imagine a world and to produce it. And it's the way that production or labor is divided that determines how a society runs, and it determines really whether a society is ecologically rational or not. This is a key point. Our society is obviously ecologically irrational. Global warming is one, perhaps the most spectacular instance of that, but it's a very irrational society. But that has to be traced back to the total way in which people live, the ways in which things like automobiles and, you know, and hyper-consumption is forced upon them, the way in which people are basically treated like so many lab animals in an experiment, you know, to consume more and more and more. And all of that, that's the actual mechanism of the way the society works that leads to the ecological crisis. So we want to look more closely at that through the lens of labor, and realizing that labor can be free or unfree. And it makes all the difference in the world, whether it's free or unfree. By unfree, I don't just mean slavery. I mean wage labor is unfree, because you give up your ability to create by turning over your power to work to another who pays you a wage. And that's the fatal decision that makes for capitalism when it's generalized. And that's the fatal decision that makes for the ecological crisis and global warming.
You know, in a society of free people, you're going to have, you know, 80% writers and painters, and who's going to take out the garbage?
Yeah.
Oh my God. We're being immortalized. Oh, we are.
The best times I've had in my life were working with a theater troupe called the Bread and Puppet Theater. Now, the Bread and Puppet makes theater.
There he sees 6 springs of water rise, fountains flow, rivers run, the mist below the skies hides the sun. Springs of water rise, fountains flow, rivers run, the mist below the skies hides the sun.
In the morning, there would be, you know, a meeting. What do we do today, okay? So, you know, well, we have to paint the sets, and you have to make the puppets, and, you know, we need a rehearsal of this little band and so forth. Oh, and then there's latrine duty.
I'm in here!
Because not only do the puppeteers need the latrines, but we're expecting like 30,000 people, and you have to have pit toilets for them. Latrine duty. Oh, great, latrine duty. Why?
Last year, everybody working on the hole had a PhD.
Really?
Or dig a hole in.
Yeah, that's what it is. People were working together.
You're cleaning
You got
a
it.
toilet that you have a personal connection to?
It's your toilet, yeah, and everybody uses it.
You have, you know, nobody else is going to do it, and you realize it.
It's a commodity. It's not a commodity relationship. It's based on what we're going to talk about, use values, and it's socially determined, self-determined labor. It's who wants to do it, as against you do it. One of the beauties of it is that all ages take part. You like it because you're cracking jokes all the time, and you're singing songs, and you're making. In other words, you're making like an art out of it. No question about it. There's not a division between work and play anymore. In a liberated society, there's not this. Oh, now this is the work to do, and then you have leisure, which is colonized by the the mall, video games. I don't think anybody who's done it, I mean, maybe a few exceptions, wouldn't say they would like to keep doing that kind of thing because it really mattered to feel that liberated. Yeah, there was some gender distinction, but nothing worth talking about, really. And I'll just finish this off with this wonderful story. friend of mine had an adopted son. He was a great drummer, and he's like a little drummer boy. He's like 5 years old. He's playing in the band, which is really good. It's 5 in the morning. It's, you know, it's July, so there's some light. And the kid wakes up his mother. Mommy, I gotta go. Why? Oh, I have to go to the band. And she says, but it's only 5 in the morning. Rehearsal isn't for 5 hours, and why do you have to go? And he says, but Mommy, he says, they need me. Isn't that wonderful? They need me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the rise and fall of the city of Mahagoni, an opera by Bertolt Brecht.
That's non-alienated social relationship. He's a little kid, and they did. They weren't like, you know, just humoring him. He really contributed. So everybody contributes.
I mean, I was raised as a Marxist. I don't know. I mean, my mom sends me cookies, you know, that say, you know, the capitalist will sell you the very rope with which you intend to hang him. So it's, and it's a little bit of a different perspective that I have. But I mean, I'm interested in, you know, again, understanding Marxist theory of primitive accumulation better, because, I mean, so many of the people that actually treat the subject as economic historians are coming from a Marxist perspective. And so if you're not well grounded or well versed in that, then you're sort of missing a lot of the points that they're making, or you miss a lot of the terminology that they're using.
So a lot of people are going to say this is very esoteric, abstract, theoretical. How could this apply to the real world? I mean, how? Well, I mean,
It couldn't apply more in some ways. I mean, when you're talking about the history of capitalism, you're talking about the history of the system we live under, and it's sort of frightening how rarely that question's asked. You know, how did this system develop? I mean, it's sort of seen as God-given. You know, even if you take most intro-level econ classes, you know, this is, you know, it's a natural human tendency, capitalism, and it's when you just scratch the surface, it becomes obvious that it isn't, and yet, you know, the facade persists.
Why do you think that is?
The whole capitalist system depends upon people not believing that there are alternatives, that there are feasible, workable alternatives, and that alternatives existed prior to capitalism. That seems fundamental to me.
The capitalist is just a personification of that capital. And I think we can see that in our parents sometimes, or the people around us, where we see that it isn't even so much of them, it's just the idea that they have to make money, they have to stay ahead of the game, so they're forced to do certain types of things because they work within a capitalist society. I think that's important, so that you can differentiate, and you can so that when you're at a protest against a W2 or something, you can realize that the people you're screaming at are just personifications of. I mean, they're just doing their job, and they don't realize their role in the bigger system.
In high school, I had taken a Western Civ class, and I was really intrigued by the subject we did on Marx and about communism, and I wanted to understand that more and understand like why this was coming about, and how the only thing we had really talked about was like that true communism couldn't be achieved, but I wanted to know like how this could be applied better, and by taking this class I see how important like social relations are, and the whole subject about alienation and everything, and that actually this class along with some others inspired me for my major, which is sociology, and how important social relations are to society, and the relationships between people and classes and alienation and races and ethnicity and everything. So it's a very prevalent issue. It still applies to our lives today.
Here is where CO2 is now. Way above where it's ever been as far back as this record will measure. When some of these children who are here are my age, here's what it's going to be in less than 50 years. You've heard of off the charts. Within less than 50 years, it'll be here. Ultimately, this is really not a political issue so much as a moral issue. If we allow that to happen, it is deeply unethical.
Well, if we allow that to happen, allow what to happen? Allowing CO2 to keep rising in an exponential way. But Gore doesn't give us the slightest insight into why the CO2 is rising. What he does in this is to graph two physical variables, namely CO2 and temperature. Having established that, we need to go on and talk about and show why the CO2 is rising, because if we don't understand that, we don't know what to do about it. So with that end in mind, let's look at some different graphs that relate CO2 content to actual social activity. Not moral activity, but economic activity. The open dots are measurements of the rate of increase of gross domestic product, which is to say, economic activity. And economic activity entails industrial activity. Industrial activity entails the production of carbon dioxide. In the first segment, the actual amount of carbon emissions thrown into the atmosphere in 1982 is pretty much the same, this is for the United States, as it was 10 years earlier in 1972. By the end of that decade, by the beginning of the 1980s, there had been a basic restructuring in the capitalist system. Now, the second aspect of that graph we want to delineate for you is what happens between the years 1993 and 2000. Notice that at this point, the graph is now rising at its most rapid. This point correlates with the very administration in United States politics that is headed by Bill Clinton and Al Gore, with Gore being the point man on environmental policies. This is a very salient point. It tells us that Al Gore, who is now speaking so eloquently of the need for climate change and to bring it under control, and is sort of spreading the blame around and moralizing and saying we have to do it, is evading the fact that it was under his administration that this got out of control, and therefore those things that he is advocating, namely continued expansion of the economic product, are an unreliable guide and nothing to put your trust in. You can see what's happening, that we live in a society that has to keep growing and expanding. And it's perfectly obvious, isn't it, that since the Earth, or in this case the atmosphere, is finite and the pressure of the society to expand is not finite, but it's endless and exponential, so it keeps increasing, that we are in a hopeless situation unless that system is changed that causes that rate of expansion and that pressure of expansion. Now, let's not mince words. That system is capitalism. Yes, during the Clinton-Gore years, the ruling slogan was, "It's the economy, stupid." That, my friends, is a really inconvenient truth.
Jonathan Levitt took me aside yesterday. He says, "Joel, just don't speak of capitalism because it might freak some of them out." But what can I do? We have to tell truth to power. We have to call things by their proper name. We need clarity. because we see clearly now that after 500 years of exploitation and oppression, this monster has given birth to itself as a world system installed to suck the life out of the whole planet and convert it to cash.
He's not really telling us about the system. He's just stating it as a fact that it's going to be all right, and since everybody is indoctrinated to believe that capitalism is the finest possible way for humans to create wealth, and that it's infinitely adaptable, and so on and so forth. And there's this huge apparatus of ecological economics and all kinds of green capitalists and all kinds of green washers that present the system in a positive light. And people really don't want to believe otherwise, because then they'd be really in uncharted waters. He leaves out the basic features of the capitalist system that actually lead to a much more ominous assessment of the situation. And the most basic feature is this. I'll come right to the point. Capitalism is an economic system that is predicated, that requires endless growth if it's going to survive. Everything within capitalism has to be measured according to its ability to sustain economic growth, which is, put it another way, to sustain a regime of profit or a regime of accumulation of capital. The accumulation of capital has to keep going, otherwise the capitalist system falls into tremendous crisis.
Lease the Nissan Pathfinder or Murano, your choice, $299 per month. 100,000 Nissans by April 2nd. Get to your Nissan dealer now and start your savings.
It begins with the making of commodities. Capital will not accumulate unless commodities are made and put on the market, sold, and the value realized. That value which is realized then re-enters another cycle of commodity production, except there's now more of it. We, particularly in the United States, consume far too much. We consume so much that we're going to bring the whole of nature down around us, you know, like Samson in his temple. But from the standpoint of the economy, we are under-consuming because we're not buying enough of these cars at a rate that will allow the capital built into them to be circulated properly and to be realized and to grow, because capital must grow. So because capital must grow, cars are always under-consumed, even if from the standpoint of ecology, they are over-consumed. Under-consumed means that they have to be sold to you. Therefore, you have to be made to feel it is a necessity to buy a car.
XJ8L with heated seats and heated steering wheel with zero down payment at your tri-state area Jaguar dealer.
There's no end to advertisements about cars, just as there is no end to the unsold cars on even this modest lot. And I emphasize again, it's a very modest lot. This is not what you'd find, you know, outside of Los Angeles or San Diego or Chicago, or, you know, in the really concentrated suburbs. We're 100 miles from New York City. Kingston is a small, rather pleasant town on the whole, and yet even in this rather isolated place, you see the metastasis, it's the only word for it, of this gigantic cancer that has seized the world and which is constantly reproducing itself.
Let me give you an example of the wrong way to balance the economy and the environment. One part of this issue involves automobiles. Japan has mileage standards up here. Europe plans to pass Japan. Our allies in Australia and Canada are leaving us behind. Here's where we are. Now there's a reason for it. They say that we can't protect the environment too much without threatening the economy and threatening the automakers, because automakers in China might come in and just steal all our markets. Well, here is where China's auto mileage standards are now, way above ours. We can't sell our cars in China today because we don't meet the Chinese environmental standards.
Well and good. You know, after all, U.S. automakers are dreadful offenders in the global warming problem. What is Gore really saying here? He's referring everything to the competition within capitals. That's his reference point. It's not that he wants to cut down on that he wants to deal with accumulation itself. No, he wants to round off some of its edges. He wants to make the automobile a less dreadfully polluting entity. Well, after all, you know, that's not so bad. I mean, they took lead out of gasoline, and that was a good thing. But do we feel that we're better off on the whole for it? Of course not, because on the whole, we're still victims of the automobile culture.
Take a look at this. This is an example of what the wave of the future looks like. A very fancy sports car, one that also happens to be electric. Just one example of green technology quickly becoming all the rage in Silicon Valley among venture capitalists with money to burn. This is the Tesla Roadster. It runs without a drop of oil. All you have to do is plug it in, charge it up, and go. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. The downside is it costs a cool $92,000. Ouch. But the makers say it rivals practically any other sports car on the road today.
The point is not how to make more fuel-efficient cars, which is a very good idea, but the point is how to liberate ourselves, how to free humanity from the tyranny of the automobile itself.
You know, Anita, I talked to a lot of executives that say they're not even sure there's anything to the global warming thing, but they're not going to fight it if the opinion is that it's real. They're going to develop products that address it. Have you heard that?
Well, I can tell you this. Many venture capitalists up in Silicon Valley are saying this is very big, and they think this is going to be a great investment for them. In fact, renewable technology is the third kind of investment, the third highest investment that people are spending money on these days. So they believe this is a good investment.
We can't sell our cars in China today because we don't meet the Chinese environmental standards.
He's creating global warming as a new site of accumulation. He's making global warming itself a new place for commodification. I guess he thinks that that's a good thing because that'll enable us to be rich even as we cut fuel consumption. But it's totally wrong-headed. It's exactly what perpetuates the problem in the guise of resolving the problem. The system as a whole is driven by a unrelenting and insensate and insane drive towards accumulation of capital at all costs. And that's really the danger, because of that drive you have imperialism and war and ecological breakdown, and that drive is the rub, okay? But the accumulation of capital is what it's about.
I'm Tom Wilson, president of Allstate. Tonight's show will help you understand our country's vulnerability to some of nature's strongest storms. At Allstate, we've helped hundreds of thousands of families rebuild their lives after disaster strikes.
It only took 2 minutes for this town to be destroyed. To a little girl who lived through it, this is more than a teddy bear. It's a step towards normal. It's why Allstate catastrophe teams not only have hot coffee and help for grown-ups, they've also handed out more than 12,000 teddy bears to kids. People come first. Everything else is second. That's Allstate stands. Are you in good hands?
You've heard of this before, an insurance company bailing out when the going gets tough. You know, this is not just the folks on the coast. This is everybody in Mississippi, right?
I'm telling you, you know, this is really tough news. But you got to understand, these companies are in a profit to make, in business to make a profit. They're not non-profit companies. They want to make some money there, and they're not making money in that area.
They're making money elsewhere, a lot of it, right?
That's right, but let me tell you, they could have gone a step further. They could have not renewed existing policies. They haven't said that yet. But I got to tell you, Miles, that happens all the time. In fact, some states have rules or laws that prevent them from doing the non-renewals in big numbers, limiting it to, say, 4% a year.
So it is legal to do what they're doing?
Oh, sure. You betcha.
TINA syndrome, T-I-N-A. There is no alternative. We have to live within this current world, even if it's destroying us. is on the one hand reinforced by its naturalism. You know, capitalism is the natural outcome of human nature, and we're just that way, which is of course nonsense. I mean, if we were just that way, why do we have to be so indoctrinated? You know, why do we have to be taught and kept in line and disciplined by debt if we were just spontaneously capitalist? So capitalism is naturalized; it's made to be part of nature. And another side of it is that, given the aura and majesty of the law, you know, as the commentator says in this little clip about the insurance industry, well, I mean, they can't behave any differently because that's the law. I mean, they're just, you know, not a charitable organization. They're defined by the law. Once again, the totality of the capitalist system is then defined as, you know, something outside of human agency. I mean, the laws are made by people according to as they live their lives and according to their relationships of power and authority. If you look, of course, back in the history of the United States, you'll see how the Constitution, which is the law, but it was, you know, it's a human document, was set up to protect property, creating, you know, a black slave is 3/5 of a person. That's the law, you know, and they had to go to war in order to stop that law. If we think about it, we have a system of laws that have to also be changed, and we don't want to go to war because that's only going to make things worse, but they can be peaceably changed only if people rise up and express their democratic power.
This industry has been making a ton of dough. You brought up this question, and we should probably answer it. You said, hey, Jerry, they're making a lot of money. Record profits last year, in fact, $60 billion, 2 times their 2003 profit. It's a lot of dough out there, but they weren't making money in this part of the world, so they're going to pull out. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. It's going to be harder to do business. It's going to be harder if you're a homeowner. And I'm hearing right now from my sources that in Florida, the real estate industry there is having a very tough time because people can't get homeowner policies. That's one of the reasons.
It's difficult for these companies, I'm sure, to explain this when they have such, you know, tremendous profits.
Karl Marx, in his book Das Kapital, put it very powerfully. He said, this is a quote from Marx, he says, accumulate, accumulate. That is Moses and the prophets, as far as capital is concerned. In other words, capitalism and capital takes on also a kind of a religious aura. There's like an imperative that no individual capitalist can stand against except he fall outside the system and become, you know, discarded by it. That's the principle of accumulation.
So Tim, at the end of the day, what does success look like for the insurance industry and then for consumers?
Unfortunately, there's no easy answers, but in the end, the consumer is going to be faced with higher insurance premiums.
I don't know what's going to happen to me and my family. This is my dad's job.
I'm Stanley Johnson. I've got a 4-bedroom house. Like my car? It's new. I even belong to the local golf club. How do I do it? I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. Somebody help me.
You gotta get a truck from Prestige Toyota.
You've gotta get the all-new 2007 Toyota Tundra. Bigger, stronger, and better.
Woo! 22 minutes! Beat that!
You're on.
Capitalism has only taken shape within the last few hundred years, which is a hopeful sign because it should make us realize that it's not something written in the rocks. It's a human arrangement that can be renegotiated, so to speak. It's first of all a form of class society. It's a society in which some people own the productive means of society, the means of production, and other people work for them. Now, under capitalism, that takes a special form. It takes a special form in that the worker is dispossessed of not just the land, but of all kinds of knowledge and possibilities of making the world on her own or his own, and only exists as a worker insofar as he or she can sell their power to work on the capitalist market to the capitalist. And the capitalist on that market, labor market, exploits the labor in such a way that the worker produces more value, more potential wealth and capital and money, which is the form capital takes, than he or she is rewarded with in wages. The difference there is something we call surplus value. And the essence of the capitalist system, and of course you're not going to hear any of this in Gore's analysis, is the production of surplus value and the ways in which the production of surplus value has to be maximized. Now, why does it have to be maximized? That's because the class of capitalists who operate under private ownership of the means of production are always set against each other. And if the capitalists don't prevail in that internal wars, they're going to be eliminated. So capitalism is inherently a system of tremendous and innate competition. One capitalist kills many, as a great thinker once said. Capitalists are therefore forced, on simple grounds of their survival, to outperform other capitalists. Otherwise, they'll disappear as capitalists. They're not going to be killed, but they'll lose their firm, they'll lose their social power, they'll lose their prestige, they'll lose their raison d'etre. And so it's not that capitalists are greedy, although greed is inherent in the capitalist system. It's that capitalists must constantly compete with other capitalists to produce more value, and the way they do that is through exploiting the work of their working forces. I mean, there are other ways, but that is essential because that's the way society is structured, right? Now, I'm simplifying a little bit because I want to make the big point here. The big point is this, that in order to produce more and more surplus value from the labor that the capitalist controls, what the capitalist has to do is to increase the productivity of the worker. That in any given working day, and since values are proportional to time, you can talk about the value of the labor as a function of, this is A, this is B, and this is C, and let's say this is 4 hours, okay? Half the time spent reproduce herself, half the time for the capitalist. The capitalist has 100% exploitation. We'll see that there are now logically two different kinds of things that the capitalists can do to expand the surplus value. Either lengthen the working time, make her work 10 hours, so that now he gets 6 hours of free labor. So instead of 4 hours and 4 hours, it's 4 hours and 6 hours. Rate of exploitation changes from 100% to 150%, from 4/4 to 6/4. Take this working day again. Extends from A to B, from 8 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon with an hour off lunch, whatever. And you can see, therefore, the capitalists will try to cut down the lunch time and cut down the bathroom breaks, which they do. They really do it. Okay. But set that aside. There's also another way that they can do it. Suppose we have B, and let's assume for purposes of this argument that B, C remains the same. Okay. There's another possibility, which is the capitalists can move B back to B prime. So that if this is 1 hour and this is 10 hours, and this was 5 hours, this could be moved back to 4 hours. So whereas before it was, 5/5, E equals 1. Now it's E again equals 6/4. Okay? But how does the capitalist do that? How can you do that?
Oh yeah, I forgot about this.
You want to make the worker more productive. Get it? Obviously. If the worker is more productive, then she or he can turn out the necessary number of commodities whose value would reproduce himself in a shorter period of time. That's what productivity is. Now, there are many ways of doing that. Technology is one. more largely considered automation, introducing technical inputs into the working cycle. But there's also ways of doing it in terms of training workers, of controlling their mind, okay, making them more compliant. This is where ideology comes in. This is where the educational system comes in. Remember, you're now in a social land whose landscape is configured by a werewolf who's trying to do everything possible to get more surplus labor. And you can only do that so much by increasing the length of the working day. But there is no end to what you can do by increasing the productivity of workers. However, if you increase the productivity of workers, you also cheapen the commodities made, right? And because the commodities are now cheapened, including the value of labor power is cheapened, this is an iron tendency, which I'll put here, okay, which is relative SV predominates, which means automation, which means overproduction, right? Because the worker is now making more and more commodities. They're holding their wages down because you have to do that. Therefore, they're always tending to make more than they can consume. If they're always making more commodities, more than can be consumed, if you're running a capitalist system, there's going to start to be a premium on, a constant impulsion towards heightening people's consumption of commodities. Right? In short, you're going to see a new social epoch forming, which goes under the name of, well, marketing, yes, is part of it, but the larger name is consumerism. Okay. In the years that Marx writes Capital, consumerism doesn't exist. The notion that there would be vast surpluses of commodities, that there would be Walmarts, with hundreds of thousands of commodities, doesn't exist. That there would be public relations, advertising.
2006 Nissan Altima with a special edition package. People are really drawn to it. They love the 8-way power driver's seat, dual illuminated vanity mirrors, and steering wheel mounted audio controls.
Focus.
15 minutes.
Be daring.
In other words, be extraordinary. $199 per month.
State-of-the-art platform for long-term investors with E-Trade Financial challenging the ordinary. Investors, be extraordinary.
It begins with the making of commodities. Capital will not accumulate unless commodities are made and put on the market, sold, and the value realized. And then that value which is realized then re-enters another cycle of commodity production, except there's now more of it. Do you know they just copyrighted Happy Birthday? Yes. So next time, if you have a party and somebody sings Happy Birthday, make sure that the police aren't there, because Happy Birthday is a commodity. What? Happy birthday to you? Is nothing sacred? No, nothing is sacred. That's the answer. The answer to the question is nothing sacred is nothing is sacred. Everything should be made into a commodity. But point being, if it's Happy Birthday, if it's, a Lexus 420 SUV, if it's, a Boeing 757, if it's a Dalmatian mouse, if it's a gene line, a piece of DNA, if it can be made into a commodity, it will be made into a commodity under capitalism. So the drive of capitalism is to make the whole world into commodities. The power of a capitalist system is the power of money. That's why finance, insurance, the stock markets basically rule the capitalist world. That's why the U.S. government is run, for the sake of its Treasury Department and so on.
So who would they like to see in that office if and when everything hits the fan again? And You know, inevitably, it always happens.
But the other thing is, yesterday, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, he was speaking to a panel at the Senate, and he came out with some comments, and that is what led the markets higher. He said that, first of all, he indicated that rates will stay steady for the year, and he also said the economy should grow modestly this year, and he sees inflation continuing to ease. So now, what the market's like is to know what's going on. They hate uncertainty. So this gives us a nice little base here. So what you're seeing is basically everything's not too hot and it's not too cold. And so you know what that means, right? It's the Goldilocks economy.
The
it's
Goldilocks.
Just right.
That's perfect. Perfect.
And all of this at a time when the danger of other tornadoes ahead is still very, very pronounced. So we're going to keep an eye on this. And as our financial obligations are such to focus on what's happening at the corner of Wall and Broad, focusing at what is happening at the corner of Wall and Broad.
Economy's not as bad as everybody thinks, I guess. People aren't as panicky maybe as they were in the past.
Well, I'm just happy everything is working out the way it is, and we're getting back on track here.
I didn't change anything. I didn't even look at it because I wasn't worried about it. I know it goes up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. That's just the nature of the business. It's going to go up. It's going to go down. You got to ride the wave.
Never before in human history has there been something called overproduction. Production simply tried to keep up with human needs and would be related to what people wanted or couldn't have or fought for, but it wouldn't be production for its own sake because it wasn't driven by capital and its accumulation. So we have this society in which constant expansion is the one rule, and that sort of sucks everything. It's like a big vortex, like think of a whirlpool that sort of sucks all the materials of the surrounding waters into it and into its innards. And those materials happen to be the real elements of the world. So that capitalism is a system of infinite expansion grounded in a planet that is highly finite. And it is constantly beating up against the limits of that planet. So the issue is not whether we have a carbon economy. The issue is whether we have an economy that rules society as against an economy that's contained within society. And we certainly have an economy that rules society. And it's that economy that Al Gore will not begin to criticize. It's that ruling economy that is dragging the planet down and posing the greatest threat in the history of human civilization.
That ought to do it. That ought to do it.
If you were to give some suggestions to everybody here, like what we can do for the situation now.
Separating the truth from the fiction and the accurate connections from the misunderstandings is part of what you learn here.
A really inconvenient truth calls for a really radical response. And that's the first point I want to make about this. We're talking here about the context of survival. The hypothesis that I've ventured is that the capitalist system is not sustainable, which means it's going to be incompatible with the survival of the human species. And the first thing I would say about such responses are that they have to start small because we're a long way from social transformation. We have to learn to see in the kinds of things we can do locally what I would call the prefigurations of a transformed society. Okay, and these are things that are, like light bulbs are sort of readily available, except unlike light bulbs, they amount to new ways of social relationship that can be expanded and extended and integrated. For instance, we would want to increase the level of democratization in our society enormously. This means that we would not accept mandarins like Gore telling us what's true and what's false. We would we would develop our own responses. We would have our own study groups. We would intervene locally. We would intervene from below. We would create a democratic culture that is capable of really challenging the power structure and building within it new ways of being, sometimes at a local community level, like, passing, no carbon laws in a local community, and seeing to it that they're implemented. Changing the Constitution or the charter of certain towns to forbid, certain kinds of petro economies going through it. Things that may not even be technically legal, but nonetheless are real challenges to the system. Now, another feature you want to keep in mind is that this has to be seen as a global problem. Capitalism has globalized, and it's the global capitalist system that is destroying us. But by the same token, we have a single global society here. So we must learn the ways of solidarity between North and South. We must be very local, but we must also not be parochial. We have to deal with questions of empire as it's affected around the world. If we think of the, this is principally from the standpoint of the carbon economy, we have to try to help people in the South, say in countries like Nigeria, where their lives are being destroyed by petroleum exploration and extraction. We have to help these people. We have to develop ways of solidarity. We have to have lawyers going out there. We have to have mass movements on their behalf, and so on. Now, a more general notion is that wherever this kind of situation arises, we have to take a class position and move against the class of capitalists, all right? It's a very large issue here having to do with the Kyoto protocols that Gore helped bring into life. And I can't go into detail about it, except to say this, that the Kyoto protocols, which is considered to be the best way of moving forward in the management of global warming, are in fact dreadfully flawed precisely because they are turning over the administration of the carbon economy and the control of greenhouse gases to the capitalist system, both through pollution trading credits and also to these clean development mechanisms in the South. People should study this and realize that we're dealing here with the classic example of turning over the hen house to the fox. I mean, and these are the people who just are destroying the planet in the first place, and we must bring a stop to their capacity to do so. And what we do in bringing a stop to it, we have to intervene again politically and properly and begin to develop political parties that are, devoted to this goal. But also, and this is the next step, we have to begin to, and this is essential, to start producing on our own. We have to take production out of the hands of a capitalist system and begin to develop kinds of autonomous production. I mean, and this is complex, and there are many different angles to it. This is what makes the whole thing very stimulating and exciting. For instance, wind power is a necessary part of creating alternative energy. We're not going to get out of this crisis with any kind of civilization unless we develop means of alternative energies and renewable energies, of which wind is perhaps the least least ecologically damaging. But typically, wind power, like solar power, all of these alternative powers are put in the hands of gigantic corporations. So we have to see to it that we now have popularly elected and popularly run cooperatives, which are not grounded in profit, all right, but which are grounded in human need and ecological need. And that's another side to this. But the larger issue, which is one that has many, many examples, is to begin to create intentional communities where people are actually making the world through organic agroecology, for instance, new forms of agriculture, new forms of bringing life forth from the earth, and so on. And these forms have to be brought together with each other. And it's this bringing together which creates gradually a new planetary society. And at the far end of this, what we've done is produce a new way of living according to two sides One would be what I would call freely associated labor. In other words, we have to undo the separation of producers from the means of production. That's what socialism is called. We have to begin rethinking socialism, but now in ecological terms. So we have to have freely associated labor, which is the ability of people all around the world to reconstruct nature and their relations with nature, and also to relate to each other in such a way that this is built globally. And freely associated labor has to be administered with what's called ecocentric values. Yes, there is a moral, or I would say better, an ethical issue. There has to be an ethical shift away from a society based on commodity production to a society based on ecological integrity, building not now things for sale, but building healthy, flourishing ecosystems. And that, you'd say that is an ecocentric society, a society that has a new set of ethics. And when you've put all that together, freely associated labor, ecocentric ethics, you have what's called eco-socialism. And I think that this is the way to go. It's not a blueprint, but it's a set of rational perspectives that people can live with and work with and struggle with and join with and begin to participate in the building of a livable world beyond the deadly influence of capital and its accumulation.
To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. A robin redbreast in a cage holds all of heaven in a rage. A dove house filled with doves and pigeons shudders hell through all its regions. Homeless, 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 homeless. A dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. A horse misused upon the road calls to heaven for human blood. Each outcry of the hunted hare a fiber from the brain does tear. A skylark wounded in the wing, a cherubim does cease to sing.
By some estimates,
homeless, 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 homeless.
As a result of exposure to toxic gas.
The man asleep on the subway grate dreams the doom of the warrior state. She who weeps in a cardboard cart calls an end to the Wall Street heart. Homeless, 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 homeless. The babe that weeps the rod beneath writes revenge in realms of death. The beggar's rags fluttering in air does to rags the heavens tear. The soldier armed with sword and gun palsied strikes the summer sun. One mite wrung from the laborer's hands shall buy and sell the miser's lands. Homeless, 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 homeless. Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. every night and every night. Some are born to sweet delights. God appears and God is light to those poor souls who dwell in night. But does a human form display to those who dwell in realms of day? To those who dwell in realms of day. Thank you.